No snazzy presentations and slides from me today. It's more a bit of a wholesome run through as to what makes what I believe makes my services different to the other insolvency practitioners out there, and kind of a walkthrough of how things can be approached in a slightly different way. So yeah, that's the plan for today. And there is a Q&A guessing game for you guys as well. So it's going to be a little bit interactive. We'll see how your Latin is, shall we? So if I can just kick off with kind of demystifying what I do. So I'm always saying in our networking meetings that I'm Peter. I'm a friendly licensed insolvency practitioner. There's a lot of people that say the word friendly and insolvency don't really align. And more often than not, that's true, because when people are owed money, they're generally quite aggressive, and it's often an uncomfortable situation, and I'm often stuck in the middle of those uncomfortable situations, and it's the best way forward is to kind of talk it through with all the relevant parties, and maintaining those lines of communication, and hoping that with the passage of time and the relevant insolvency process, that an outcome could be reached, and everyone's as happy as they can be with the situation. So to answer the question, what do I do? What I think I do is I help people to sleep at night. More often than not, when people are in personally, for example, in a difficult financial spot, and they've got creditors chasing them, potentially, county court judgments are ordered against them, it's always worth talking through the options that are available. Similarly, if you're a director of a limited company, you've got employees that you're struggling to pay, you've got suppliers that you're struggling to pay, suppliers putting you on stop, struggling to deliver services, that kind of thing, then it's always good to have a conversation on the options. And once you know what your options are, it gives you a bit more clarity. When you've got a bit more clarity, you're more at peace, and hopefully with the right strategy, it might be an informal option or a formal insolvency option, will give people a bit of extra peace. So kind of where my work comes from is probably the next question, and predominantly my introductions to, more often than not, company directors in financial difficulty come from their accountants. So most people, when they're in financial difficulty, will have a conversation with their accountant. It's usually when it comes to doing the year-end accounts, and then it becomes a bit obvious when looking at the balance sheet that things aren't particularly healthy. A warning sign generally is where you have an insolvent balance sheet. So the liabilities at the bottom of the balance sheet are greater than the assets at the top. And another one is a director's loan account. So when a business is struggling, usually cash flow is a little bit tight, then directors keep injecting money into the business, and then that grows and grows and grows. And that's usually a telltale sign to say, hang on a minute, we should take a step back. Why we need to introduce so much cash? What's going wrong? What can we tweak to make this situation a bit more comfortable, the company less dependent on its director? So for me, got some really good relationships with my introducing accountants, and I'm basically on tap to be able to give their clients advice, specifically insolvency advice, because accountants aren't able to close a company. It's a specialist job that you need an insolvency license for. The other source is also solicitors. So solicitors often deal with contentious matters when there's a debt that hasn't been paid. They're often acting for the person who's owed money, and that's also a route into me being able to assist. So a prime example might be someone's lent somebody money, they haven't paid, and to force the hand, you can go to court. Once you've gone to court and you've got a CCJ, you can enforce it. If it's a slightly larger debt, then you could potentially issue bankruptcy proceedings if it's an individual, or you can seek to wind them up through the court if they're a company. And then my job would be to collect in the company's assets and then pay all the creditors, all the people that are owed money, pay them back out. So that is actually insolvency in a nutshell: collecting the assets and pay out everyone who's owed money. So the next thing I'd like to run through is insolvency jargon and what I believe makes me different. So half of insolvency is in legalese, the rest of it a bit in Latin, and the terms just keep changing. There's been a lot of changes in the Insolvency Act and the rules, and there's forever fiddling and tweaking in our industry. And the best bit of advice that I had was from a long-standing accountant introducer of mine, and he said, I try and focus on giving advice as if I'm speaking to my own mother. So not to be condescending, to keep it simple, don't use jargon, and really get to the point. And that's something that I've carried with me. I think it's an excellent piece of advice. And so it's all about keeping it simple and to the point. So I've picked out 4 fairly common insolvency terms that I don't know if you've ever read a report prepared by an insolvency practitioner or anything in mainstream media. You may have come across of these. So hands up if anyone knows what pari passu means. Doesn't seem to be any takers. So it's Latin for in equal measure, and it's the most fundamental point of insolvency, really. So there are different classes of creditors, and they get paid at different bands. So employees are first, then it's HMRC. Sometimes it might be the bank, and then it's everybody else. So it's paying those people out in equal measure. I just don't know why we don't use a different term like paying everybody in equal measure instead of Latin terminology, but never mind. The next one is fiduciary duty. You may have heard of that. Any takers, Julie?
It's something to do with the legal duty to do things correctly.
Yeah, spot on. So I translate that as as a director, you have a duty to act in the best interests of the company, basically. So you're spot on with that. Which leads me on to the next one. Anyone know what misfeasance is? Come across that term at all? So misfeasance is the term for, loosely translated as dodgy director. So if you've done something that you shouldn't have done, you've been misfeasant because you have not you breached the fiduciary duty. So that's the legalese for doing something you shouldn't have done. And that's usually cost the company money. A prime example might be, a director who's probably been misadvised. They might have, 50 grand of bounce back loan stuck in the company, and then they draw it out personally and they leave all the creditors high and dry. They've breached their duty because, they shouldn't have done that. And they've cost the company creditors and the bank money. And so they've been misfeasant. And there's a claim against that dodgy director. Last one is linked to misfeasance, but restitution. Any takers on restitution?
Making good the wrong that you've done.
Spot on, Heather. Spot on. So when there's an action against a dodgy director for misfeasance, then what you're seeking is restitution. So I translate that to be payback by the dodgy director. So it's all these terms that, you know, aren't wholly necessary. There's other ways of explaining insolvency and the issues surrounding it, and that's what I aim to achieve when speaking with directors and other stakeholders. You know, creditors often find themselves in this position by accident, so they're owed money by somebody, a company or someone. They don't choose to be in that situation, and so it's having that kind of compassion to understand their position. But then at the same time, more often than not, if the company's gone into liquidation, it's because it's knackered. There's a whole bunch of other you know, creditors in that same position, and more often than not, there isn't enough assets to go around. HMRC these days have put themselves at the top of the pile. So it used to be that, you know, unsecured creditors, so basically everyone else in that list of priority, would get something back in an insolvency. But from what we're seeing at the moment, since 2020, when HMRC are now top of the pile, that HMRC are getting paid out first, and there doesn't seem to be all that much trickling down for everyone else. And, you know, it's even pushed the banks, who have a bit like when you mortgage your property, the bank get paid out first. The banks have been pushed down in the order of priority as well by HMRC. So it's a slightly different landscape for the last couple of years. I think in part because UK PLC needs every penny that it can get, and insolvency was one of the areas that's been tweaked to see what else can be clawed back. So that's a whistle-stop tour of me, what I think makes me different, and a little bit on insolvency as well. If we've got any questions for me.
Susie?
Yeah, say for example, you're dealing with a company that's had to go through insolvency because they're owed money from someone else.
Yeah.
Are you able to then also look after the company that's not been able to pay them in the first place, or would that be a conflict of interest? Do you have to kind of keep that separate, or are you able to kind of deal with all of them?
Very good question. So the insolvency practitioners are bound by the Insolvency Code of Ethics. And so you do have to do a situation by situation review as to what the ethical threats are. If they're connected companies and they're all part of a group and they're all owned by the same entity, that's obviously very different to if the company that owes the money is completely unconnected. And yeah, you'd have to assess it on a case by case merit. So in that situation, what you do is you'd be going after that main company that owes money, and the company that I'd be dealing with is a creditor of the other company, and depending on what's happening with that company, you might, if it's still live and it's still trading, then you'd issue a statutory demand and try and get that money paid in, so that then you can do your job and pay the rest out.
But you wouldn't be able to, for example, actually have that as a, I know this sounds awful, but as a referral, it's like, well, we're going under because he's going under and can't pay us. Here's his details. Maybe you can help him.
Yeah.
Which could in turn help the one that you were originally helping, because they might get their situation solved.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, and there is often knock-on effects in insolvency. So the reason why construction is top of the list in terms of an industry for insolvency is that when the main contractor doesn't pay one of the subcontractors, or the main guy goes bust, then everybody else as a subcontractor underneath can fall by the wayside as a result of that non-payment. That's it's just a domino effect, and unfortunately we see it all the time.
Excellent, Lisa. Thank you. Quick questions. What's your favourite part of the job, and what's your least favourite part of the job?
Okay. So my favorite part of the job is when you're able to rescue a company or an individual. So a great one just before Christmas was a 40-year-old company that owed HMRC 1.6 million. HMRC demanded the whole amount paid. Obviously, the company didn't have 1.6 million because of COVID. And HMRC said, no, we want it paid within 23 months, which was a very random, arbitrary figure. And the company simply couldn't afford that. I mean, the cash flows indicated that they couldn't really pay more than 20-odd thousand pounds. So we did a review of the company, reviewed the cash flow forecasts, went back to HMRC and the other creditors and said, look, guys, the company can afford to pay £23,000 every month for the next 5 years, and everybody will be paid in full. And us as the insolvency practitioners will oversee that happening and pay you at the end of every year, so that by year 5 you're paid off in full. The creditors agreed because the alternative was placing the company into liquidation and losing the best part of 50 jobs the week before Christmas. So that was really rewarding. Bits of the job that are, I suppose, tricky are when you're dealing with situations that are kind of unpleasant. There's a lot of bounce back loan fraud out there. Had a telephone call this morning actually from a guy that was in despair. He was like, I owe 50 grand to the bank. We got talking. He explained to me that he misunderstood the bounce back loan application scheme. His company wasn't trading. He wasn't eligible for the bounce back loan. And it kind of got a bit messier when he said the guy that assisted me to do the bounce back loan application said that talked him into opening another company with him. He diverted some of those funds to this guy. This guy's now disappeared, and he's really stuck. But the long and the short of it was, this is bounce back loan fraud, and insolvency won't help you. So there are times that you can't help everyone, and there's difficult situations out there. And sometimes I do talk myself out of a job when I can't help. But it's a tight balance between giving the right advice and doing the right thing.
Excellent.
Peter,
Thank
just
you.
on that, sorry, just a bounce back loan fraud. Have you seen a lot of that? Because we heard a lot of rumours and that people saying they basically got the loans on dormant companies and then closed the dormant company down and then just pocketed the money really. And then do you see a lot of that?
A prime example this morning. So yes, unfortunately so. I think COVID was very desperate times. I think banks have a lot to answer for in terms of the application. There wasn't enough due diligence done at the time of the application. I read an article about the billions that is anticipated to have been lost in bounce back loan fraud. It's all going to come out in the wash. The insolvency service, they receive a report from every insolvency practitioner on every insolvent liquidation that goes through, and from that report, if there's been, now that you all know what misfeasance is, if there's been some form of misfeasance surrounding, say, the bounce back loan, then the insolvency service can seek a disqualification order from those directors so that they can never act as directors again for a period of time, anything from 2 to 15 years. But the situation that you just described, James, is both fraudulent and also criminal. So if someone's taken a bounce back loan out and they were not trading, then they were clearly not eligible for a bounce back loan, because there's no business there that needs protecting with that extra cash. What are you using the cash for? So there's a fraudulent application, and then assuming then that they've taken that money and pocketed it because there's no business to have spent any of that money on, then again, that's also fraudulent and misfeasance. And then the next step is when you go and try and dissolve it, and that's a criminal act. So that there has been in the accountancy the insolvency press doing the rounds, actually, someone who got jail time for doing exactly that. So it was in 2020 where he took the money out, got the bounce back loan, took the money out, and then applied to dissolve the company, all in 2020. And he was able to do that then. Now, the insolvency service, the banks, and Companies House are all interlinked. So as soon as somebody tries to apply to dissolve a company off the register, the bank will automatically put an objection so that can't happen again. But the individual that I just mentioned ended up in jail for doing exactly what you described, James.
That's good, because I think
that's naughty, isn't it?
Mm.
Sorry.